Okay, so today's webinar, guys, obviously about influencers being the key to attracting Chinese travelers. I really love this topic because we've had really successful events in the past on influencer marketing and on attracting Chinese travelers. But today we're bringing both of these topics together. So, Lauren, I guess I'll just let you introduce yourself to everyone and get started.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you guys came today. I know this is a super niche topic, but I hope that it can still be pretty interesting to you. I'm really passionate about this topic, and I know that the title that I chose for this presentation is very strong, right? But I really believe that influencers are super important for the Chinese tourism market. So that's why I chose it. A little bit about me so you understand why I'm so interested in this topic. I just recently returned to the US after living in China for over 8 years. And I first became interested in Chinese social media because I was on a reality TV show. And when I was on the show, a lot of the other contestants were like, hey, you should open up a Chinese social media account on Weibo because a lot of people who watch the show are going to want to learn more about you, and this is a way that you can, share more about yourself and kind of control the PR that's going out about you. And I was like, oh, okay. So I tried it out and became hooked. I really got interested in these Chinese platforms, and so after the show, I actually went into the entertainment industry, and I was a TV host for a Chinese travel show. And then I wanted to learn more about PR and digital marketing and Chinese social media. So I worked in consumer marketing for an international PR firm for a couple of years. And then after that, I went and became a live streamer. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the huge trend that's been going on in China over the past few years, but in China, you can actually be a live streamer as a full-time job. So I was doing that, and now I've transitioned more into being a travel influencer. I kind of returned to my roots of focusing on Weibo and some of the more traditional Chinese social media channels. And I'm also back in the US, and I'm a digital marketing consultant. So I'm really interested in Chinese influencers and the travel industry. So I just love this picture. So I want to ask, is this what comes to mind when you hear the words Chinese tourists? I think for a lot of people, this is the first thing they think of when you hear those two words. I know that since being back in the US, when I tell friends and family and people I meet that I'm a travel influencer for China, that this is exactly what they think of when they think of Chinese tourists. Over the past few years, as we've seen more outbound travel, we've been seeing, these big buses of Chinese tourists who might be middle-aged. They don't speak a lot of English. They don't have a lot of understanding about other countries around the world. And, they're kind of rushed from place to place. They look at stuff, take some pictures, maybe buy something, and then they get back on the bus and they go to the next destination. So I think that this is what a lot of people have in mind, and they think that most Chinese people are traveling in these large tour groups, and they think, so why would influencers be important? Why would have influencers have any effect on the Chinese travel market? But if you've been paying any attention to news recently, you would know that while these large groups of Chinese tourists might have been the trend in the past, this is changing. There has been a dramatic shift in the Chinese travel market over the past year or two as the industry is maturing. So I really want you to take a moment to look at these three statistics that I've outlined here. So the first one, nearly 60% of Chinese outbound travelers are millennials and Generation Z. So nearly 60% of Chinese outbound travelers are, their late 30s and younger, right? And the second one is less than 1/4 of Chinese travelers plan on traveling with a tour group on their next trip abroad, right? So less than 1/4. That's a pretty, I think, surprising statistic for a lot of people. All right. And then the last one is 72% of Chinese people traveling overseas use websites, blogs, and social media to plan their trip. Right? So they're heavily relying on these online resources to plan their trip. Right? So I want to take a closer look at those three statistics. So when we're talking about millennial and Gen Z travelers, they're a lot different than Chinese travelers we might have seen in the past, right? They're more confident with their English, they're more educated, they're more worldly, right? They grew up watching, Western TV shows like Friends, right? They understand what other countries are like. And they don't want to be rushed. They want to stay longer in each place. They want to have a real local experience. And because of that, they want to spend more on housing. They want to spend more on dining. They really want to enjoy the experience. And they also want unique experiences. So, of course, if they're visiting some, New York City for the first time, they're probably going to want to go to Times Square and Empire State Building and these kind of, the classic sites, right? But they're also going to want to do some unique things that they can share with other people and kind of show their individuality and their taste, right? And the last thing is that a lot of these younger travelers have a negative impression of travel agencies and tour groups. And usually I mean like Chinese travel agencies and tour groups. They have a bad reputation because a lot of these tour groups are known for taking people not necessarily to the best locations, the best attractions, the best restaurants, but they take them to places where they can get a kickback. So they're really not interested in giving the tourist the best experience. And they also have a really bad reputation for taking people on forced shopping trips. So this has kind of left these younger travelers a little bit jaded, and so they want to travel more on their own. So, the second statistic that we saw said that less than 1/4 of Chinese people wanted to travel with an agency, with a tour group on their next trip. So independent travel in China is on the rise. And you can see from this chart over on the right that there's a huge shift from their first trip abroad, right? Their first trip abroad, maybe they're not very confident, so they want to go with a group. And then their next trip, they are much more likely to travel independently, right? But there's still space for tour companies, right? We can see that over on the right, a lot of them will make their own arrangements but hire a local guide. So 18% of travelers said this, right? Or maybe can see that 35% will buy a travel package but travel independently. So there still is a lot of opportunity for these tour operators, but maybe local tour operators have an advantage, or they want specific packages that are maybe one day or one activity as opposed to a tour group that will take care of the entire trip. So also when it comes to these younger independent travelers, they're not all the same. There are different segments. So family travel is very popular. Young couples traveling is very popular. same-sex groups of all females or all males, they don't travel as much in mixed groups. It might be all male or all female. And solo travel is becoming more popular, and surprisingly, it's among females. There are more female Chinese solo travelers than males. And while they are looking for this more spontaneous, maybe more relaxed, more flexible trip, they like to be well prepared. So Chinese travelers like to spend a lot of time on research and planning before their trip. So we mentioned before that they are using online resources to plan their trip. So we can see here more specifically that 72%, right, 72% of them are going to travel websites, blogs, and social media to plan their trip. And I think what's really interesting, if we look at the graph over on the right, is that the younger the traveler is, the more they rely on these online resources to plan their trip. So for that millennial generation, the millennials and the Gen Z, which are the two bars on the left, you can see that using online resources is even more important for them than older generations. Right? So what does this have to do with influencers? Well, I think from learning all that about the change that's going on in the Chinese travel market, I think after looking at those three statistics, that you should be able to start to realize the importance of influencers, right? So they play a really important role because the first one is that they're providing inspiration. Right. This is something that they've always done, right, is provide inspiration. So, providing beautiful images and photos that will make people want to visit a destination or, help them discover a new destination. And they are seen as trustworthy, right? Influencers are seen to be more trustworthy than travel agents or tour guides because, like I mentioned, the travel agent or tour guide might not be giving a recommendation based on, whether it's actually a good place or not, but because they might be getting a kickback. So a lot of younger people have put a lot of trust in these influencers and really will take their advice. And the last one is that Chinese travel influencers are a very valuable resource for independent travelers. We're going to talk a little bit more in a bit, but a lot of very popular travel influencers in China will write extremely detailed travel guides with they will go so in depth with their recommendations for specific locations and attractions and prices and addresses, and they really spend a lot of time to provide this detailed information, which is extremely useful for independent travelers when they're making their travel plans. So now I want to talk about the top platforms for these Chinese travel influencers and the best types of content for each of these platforms. I'm talking about this because, if you decide to work with influencers in the future, I think this will be really helpful to find out which platforms they're on and also to be able to communicate with them more specifically about what type of content you hope that they can provide and what type of content might work best on each platform. So I'm not going to go into depth on what these platforms are. Hopefully, if you know a little bit about social media in China, that you have heard of these platforms before. So the first one is Weibo, and I'm sure you've probably heard of this. It's an enormous platform in China, and it's an excellent platform for travel influencers, because a lot of people go on Weibo because they're bored or because they're looking to be entertained, or they're, it's very similar to Instagram. In a lot of Western press, I hear people liken Weibo to Facebook and Twitter, but I think Weibo is actually more similar to Instagram in terms of user behavior and the style of the content, right? It's a lot of beautiful images, and people want to look at pretty things or interesting, funny things when they go on Weibo. So Weibo has also expanded the types of content that it allows a lot over the past few years. So on Weibo, you can post photos, videos, articles, live streaming, and most recently they added 360 photos or 360 videos. This has actually been pretty popular for a lot of travel brands because it's a new way to show off some beautiful scenery or show off your destination. It really catches people's eye when it's in the feed. And like I said, Weibo is usually a very inspirational platform, but you can also find some ways to promote some more informative content. Talk about that in a moment. I do want to note, and we'll also talk about this a little bit more later on, but if you are working with Weibo influencers, it's really important not to just look at their follower numbers, because as you have probably heard, in China, and especially on the Weibo platform, it's extremely easy to buy fake followers, fake likes, fake comments, right? So you definitely need to look at all aspects of this influencer and not just say, oh, wow, they have tons of followers. We definitely want to work with them. So I wanted to give some specific examples of those types of content that I mentioned before. So over on the left is a photo post. I see a lot of companies and brands making this mistake, but ideally when you post photos on Weibo, you want to post 9 photos. They allow you to post up to 9, and it looks in this grid pattern, and the ones that'll get the best reaction, like you can see from this post, they all kind of complement each other, and they look visually similar, kind of creating a mosaic, and that'll really attract people in. And even though this is a photo post, this blogger has also provided a lot of specific information about this destination. She went whitewater rafting in New York State in the Poconos, and she included, if you can open the content of this post even further, I think you can see the little green, there's some green characters there. If you click on that, it'll unfold and there'll be even more words written below that. And she included the address and the name of the company and the location, lots of things. So this was a pretty popular post. Over on the right, you can see a video. Video content is very popular these days on Weibo, and the Weibo platform itself really encourages video content. So they might push it out to, and it'll get more views than just a photo post might. And I mentioned that Weibo also allows articles. So articles will appear similar to a video, except for there will be a title underneath it. If they click on the the photo and the title, the article will pop out. So this is a great way of you can put a travel guide onto Weibo as well. So as I said, it's not only inspirational, but it can be very informative as well. And it's a great way to repurpose your content. You can post your travel guide somewhere else and then also post it on Weibo as an article. And some influencers especially before the article function came out, they would use long form photos as a way to post travel guides. So you can see this on the right here. That's a set of long form photos that if you click on the photo, they expand out to look like those two long photos in the center there. I've heard that this type of content is discouraged now, that Weibo's algorithm actually doesn't like long form photos, but that's also an option for posting travel guides. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a better idea of what type of content travel influencers can use on Weibo and what it can look like. Another major platform for travel influencers is going to be WeChat. So if you're familiar with WeChat, you know that official accounts on WeChat are very similar to blogs. Official accounts can post articles. Depending on the account, they can post them daily or weekly. And there are different types of travel accounts, and what I mean by that is some of them are more of personal accounts of someone's travel, maybe a guide, what was their experience like. And some of these accounts are more similar to an online travel publication and have a different style to them. So you can see by taking a look at these two photos are from a very popular account called Shui Guo, and this the name of this account means literally means I have slept here. And this blogger, the guy in the photo, does hotel stays all over the world and writes very, very detailed articles about his visits to hotels. So his articles are from more of a personal perspective, but you can see that on WeChat, popular accounts will be very well formatted with very nice imagery, and the writing will be very witty and interesting. Here are two examples of two other kinds of WeChat accounts that are also very popular travel accounts. So you can see on the left is an account called 24 Hours. And this account is more of what I was talking about with the like an online travel publication. They tend to tell more of a story, and their photos are more of an artistic style. They might not go into as much like depth as far as details about how to get to this place or what your experience will be like, right? It's more of a storytelling article. And on the right here is another more personal account. This blogger also has a Weibo account that's very popular, and she will post detailed travel guides on her WeChat account. You can see she has day 1, day 2, and she'll include pictures of each of the locations. So the next platform that I wanted to talk about is one that not as many people might be familiar with. WeChat and Weibo are very well known. They're more general social media platforms. This one, called Mafengwo, is specifically for the travel industry, but it's one that people really need to be using more. It is a user-generated content travel review site. So, but at the same time, it's also an OTA. This is a very common combination in China. I specifically wanted to talk about this one because it's very popular among those Millennial and Gen Z travelers. And unlike Weibo and WeChat, which people might go to for inspiration, people will come to Mafengwo once they've, kind of got an idea of where they want to go. They come to this website to do research and planning and look for specific advice on the location. So as I said, it's a user-generated travel site, travel review site. So it allows you to sign up. Anyone can sign up for an account and post travel guides. And these travel guides, the most popular ones are very long form. I mean, they're almost like books. They're very long form, in depth, lots of details, photos, web links, addresses, you name it. It is, what's interesting about a lot of China's OTAs and about Mafengwo is not only can you post these travel guides, but these websites will have social features added to them. So users can like, comment, share, and save each other's posts. And content creators can grow a following on this OTA. And they become bloggers for the OTA, for Mafengwo. They are like a Mafengwo travel blogger. And maybe they also have a following on Weibo, and maybe they also have a WeChat account, but some of them don't. Some of them are just specifically bloggers for these OTAs. They get massive followings just on these travel review websites. And of course, if they become popular enough, the site will, give them special verification, and, they'll become kind of like an official blogger for the site. And as I mentioned, Mafengwo is not the only OTA that's doing this. Most of the other big Chinese OTAs like Ctrip, Breadtrip, Fliggy, Tuniu, all of these websites have this user-generated travel review, travel guide feature, and they'll have kind of their own set of influencers. The reason that I wanted to point out Mafengwo is, I think, as I mentioned, it's very popular among millennials, maybe more so than all the other sites. And also because I think you can see by these images that Mafengwo really, it's a travel review site that is also an OTA. Whereas maybe some of the other sites are OTAs, and they also have travel review content, but that's not their main priority. Mafengwo really makes it a priority to provide extremely detailed, extremely useful travel content. So hopefully I've convinced you by now that it's really important to work with influencers, and also that there are lots of different ways that you can work with influencers. But you might be wondering how to choose the right influencers. So I think that there's a couple of things that you can think about when you're choosing a Chinese travel influencer. And a lot of these questions, a lot of these things are very similar to choosing an influencer on a Western platform like Instagram or something. I think people really need to remember that Chinese travelers are not all the same. So you really need to think, is this influencer a good fit, right? Not all influencers are the same. Not all Chinese travelers are the same. Does this influencer, is their audience my target audience? Do they fit our attraction, right? Do they fit our demographic, right? If you're, if you're a luxury hotel, and you're working with somebody that is, backpacking, obviously that's not a good fit. So I think sometimes people just get overwhelmed by China and they think, oh, it's a China influencer, and they don't really think like you also need to choose a very specific influencer that's going to address your target market. Like I mentioned before, you really need to look into these influencers and find out, is their following real and are they engaged? Like I mentioned, for some of the Chinese social media platforms, it's very easy to purchase fake followers, fake likes, fake comments. So sometimes it can be pretty hard to tell. But it's really important to look for that. You don't want to be spending money or resources on this influencer and you're not actually reaching anyone. Also, sometimes an influencer might have a ton of followers, but their engagement is very low. And they might insist, that, oh, I didn't buy any fake followers, right? Well, this might be because there's a lot of users who got on Weibo very early on, and they were able to amass a lot of followers, but maybe since then, those followers have stopped using the platform, they've become inactive, or they're not, as interested in this person anymore. So sometimes there are influencers with massive followings, but nobody's really commenting on their posts. So those are just some things that you need to be aware of. Quality, of course, quality is very important. Quality of content, quality of the engagement, things like that. And I think something that people need to be thinking about is that if you're going to start working with Chinese influencers, you should really think of this as a consistent, long-term campaign. Just working with one Chinese travel influencer isn't going to, change everything. So it's good to have to be working with them consistently and continuing to grow awareness about your offering. So this is something that I know a lot of people are going to be wondering about, is payment expectations, right? This is something that comes up very often when talking about any kind of influencer. The debate: should they be paid? Should they, should it just be complimentary stay or complimentary activity, right? Well, in China, it's pretty common to pay influencers for their services. So you might be able, it's worth asking, right? You might be able to get an influencer to do something for free in exchange for, complimentary stay or complimentary service, right? But in general, especially once they reach a certain number of followers, Chinese influencers are going to expect additional payment. I think this also really depends on the type of content that you're asking for. If you want them to write one of those detailed travel guides about your destination, then they're going to be putting a lot of time and effort into that. And or if they're making a video, right, they're gonna be putting a lot of time in. So that might be a factor. And I would love to give you more specific numbers, because I really believe in transparency, but it's hard. It's hard to give you specifics because there's such a range. If it's a smaller influencer, you might be able to pay them several hundred dollars, or it might end up being several $1,000s. It really depends on the size and the popularity and the type of content that you're asking for. So there is a huge range, and it might just take some negotiation and some back and forth, or maybe you might need to be willing, don't get your heart set on working with one influencer, maybe be willing to work with some other influencers instead, depending on what they say. Something that I want to mention really briefly, and I'm not going to go into detail on, but you can ask me more about if you want, in the Q&A section, is this last point, which is for Weibo influencers. If you're working with a Weibo influencer, at a minimum, I think you should try to offer to cover the costs of pushing out the post. And what I mean by this is Weibo is very similar to, Instagram, Facebook, all these other platforms, in that the organic reach is very low. And most influencers on Weibo will pay to push their posts, to sponsor their posts, so that all of their all of their followers will see the post in their like news feed almost. If they don't do that, then only maybe 15% of their followers at the most will see their post in their news feed. But you can pay a fee to have it be pushed to all of their followers. And I think personally, if you're going to be working with an influencer and you're going to be giving them, a complimentary stay or free resources, but the post is only going to reach 15% of their audience, then it's kind of, what's the point in working with them, right? You want this post to reach as much of their audience as it possibly can, right? So I think even if you're unwilling to maybe pay influencers for their services, you could maybe pay the small fee, or pay part of the fee to push the post and maximize and get the most impressions and the most out of this content. As I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I can definitely answer more questions on that if you're curious. This topic, right? Influencers have a greater impact than journalists. This is something I wanted to throw in here after having several years of experience working for a PR agency in China. When I say this, that influencers have a greater impact than journalists, I'm specifically talking about in the travel industry. I strongly believe this, that, like we saw in the beginning, people are getting their information from online resources, not from print publications, and they're not necessarily going to a magazine's website. They're going, Chinese young people are using social media. And also for a lot of these magazines, the distribution numbers are inflated. I know from experience that it's very hard to get much more than a 1 or 2 page spread in a magazine. Really, how many people are actually going to see that compared to if you work with an influencer, who's posting articles and videos? I think that they're going to reach a lot more people. Also, in my experience, these journalists, oftentimes if you invite some journalists on a fam trip, they might be a little bit more needy. Maybe they have a higher position, as an editor, assistant editor, right? And they kind of think that they're a little bit all that, and they're going to expect, business class and the finest meals and the nicest rooms, right? They might be a little bit more needy. And they also tend to skip out on parts of the itinerary. They'll straight up be like, hi, I'm not going to come and join this afternoon's activities. I got my own plans. And they'll do that without any warning. Sometimes they might not even tell you, they just don't show up. Not all Chinese journalists are like this, but I just think that if you're going to, invest your time and resources to try and reach Chinese travelers, that they would be better spent on influencers than journalists, from my personal experience. And the last note is just that they often use stock images, press kit information. They don't actually have as much original content, whereas influencers tend to use a lot more original content. And another thing that I wanted to note is that a lot of destinations and brands that I've talked to are maybe, tight on budget, and they think, well, I want to work with influencers, but I don't have a lot of money to pay them and things like that. And I just want to say that, yes, the China market is huge. So you might think that you need to have a influencer with a very large following in order to reach a significant portion of the China market. But I really think that you can work with some smaller influencers, work with several smaller influencers, and just working with your local Chinese community. That word of mouth is really powerful. And I think that sometimes quantity, working with more is probably better than working with just, putting all your resources into working with one huge influencer. There are Chinese people living all over the world. So no matter where you are, I think if you do some research, you can probably find some Chinese people who are living relatively close to where you are, and maybe you can work with them instead of inviting an influencer who is living in mainland China, right? That will cut down on flight costs. It will be easier because you don't have to deal with visa issues. They're going to be more familiar with the culture and the language. So especially if you're located somewhere like in the US or Europe, you can definitely find some influencers. Maybe they're not going to be the biggest, most famous travel influencers, but they still have pretty large followings, and they're definitely worth working with them. And you can also try and tap into university students, local WeChat accounts, and also just taking advantage of visitors who are visiting your destination or people who are using your service, and try and give them some incentives to share that with their friends and family. Word of mouth is extremely important for Chinese people. They really trust what their friends and family and people that they are close to say, so that you can tap into that as well. So consider them to be influencers too. So that's all I have. I hope I didn't overwhelm you with too many details, but I just want to leave you with this last statement that I really, really believe that as the market is changing and maturing, brands and destinations need to be allocating more resources to influencer marketing if they want to capture the next generation of Chinese travelers. I think, right now we still see a lot of tour buses and large tour groups, and it's good to develop relationships with these Chinese tour operators. But that's not the future of Chinese travel. Independent travel is the future of Chinese travel. And the best way to reach those independent travelers is through influencers. I really believe that. So anyway, that's it. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask now.
Okay, thanks so much, Lauren. That was really great. We will have a bit of a Q&A now. So you can raise your hand, guys, to ask a question. All you need to do is click on the participants button, and from there you should be able to raise your hand, and then I can unmute you so you can ask your questions. Okay, great. So we've got our first question from Alexandra.
Oh, hi. Thanks for that. I was just interested, if we wanted to start building a presence without going to an influencer, can we use the social media platforms and write in English, or does it have to be in Chinese character?
You can use English, but I think you'll find more success if you use Chinese characters. I think there are some like celebrities and things like that do have English, but it's going to work better if it's in Chinese, definitely.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I found it really interesting.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
I actually have one, so I'll ask my own now, I guess. So you said 60% in their late 30s and younger. So obviously this market has just been growing, enormously lately. So what cultural events in China actually made this happen? So what's behind this shift and growth in the market?
Well, I mean, as the economy has grown and people are starting to save up more money and have more extra money, they're traveling more. And I think, like I said, I think this younger generation has grown up with watching a lot of Western TV shows, being encouraged to speak English, being encouraged to maybe apply for universities abroad. Maybe their parents have taken them abroad. So they've just grown up with a lot more of this attitude of wanting to go out and see the world and experience more and be part of the world, not just be in China. So I think that they just grew up in a much different environment than their family did. And also this younger generation, we hear a lot about especially older Chinese people are really good at saving money, and the younger generation, not so much. They would much rather use their money to go and travel or to buy a really nice handbag. You know, they're thinking more in the here and now and enjoying their life.
Okay, so with, I guess, the other 40% of the market that I guess they haven't kind of grown up with that, I guess, sort of more Western mindset, are there influences for that market, and is it as important?
I don't think it's as important for that market. I think that market is mostly going to be, like I said, older generations, and they would rather rely on the travel agencies. If they're not using a travel agency, it's probably because they are going to travel with a relative or go to visit a relative who can speak English and can lead them around. If it's just them going on their own, they're probably going to go with a tour operator. Just because, I mean, the major reason is probably they don't speak very good English. It will be a major one. And also they just feel more comfortable being around with other Chinese travelers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much what I expected, I guess. But I guess with a market, you never want to assume anything. It's always better to have the research to back it up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure that there are outliers. I'm sure there's not everyone is like that. That's just kind of a generalization. But I do think that, yeah, that's what older travelers tend to be more like, kind of behavior.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So any more questions, guys? No, maybe not. I've got another one of my own, actually. I've got lots of questions today. I don't normally ask this many questions in the webinars. You also mentioned, you know, the rise of the female traveler. I think, you know, this is happening the world over. I know in Australia, female travelers now make up 49% of the market, even though, you know, just a few years ago, it was at 44%. So we're actually currently seeing a rise in Australia by 1% each year. So I'm really hoping, you know, next year that I'll be able to say it's finally at 50%. You know the ratio of male to female travel in travelers in China, or you know what the growth rate is like at the moment?
Off the top of my head, I don't have the specific statistics for that, but I've read a lot of articles. I should know because I've read a lot of articles on that lately. I read one recently just talking especially about for solo travelers, that the majority of solo travelers are females. But off the top of my head, I don't know the statistics for that, but it is significantly more female solo travelers than male. I definitely know that.
Okay, that's really interesting anyway, just knowing that it is the majority, because that's obviously quite, you know, different for the Western world anyway.
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. I read an article recently, a WeChat article actually, where they interviewed a lot of influencers who are female and also solo travelers, kind of asking them about their reasons, and it was really interesting just to hear a lot of them be like, well, I'm not going to wait for anybody. I want to go see the world. I'm just going to go see the world. Like, I don't want to wait for anyone anymore, which I think is really reflects on a lot of cultural changes that are going on in China, because I don't think there would have been this many solo female travelers in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That is fantastic. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more questions. So I guess we'll end today's webinar here. So thanks so much again for sharing your insights with us. So you guys know, we will be sharing the recording of the webinar on the blog really shortly. And of course, don't forget to sign up to our upcoming events. So thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.